Good morning. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Welcome to Westchester County Airport. I'm joined for some significant announcements today by Legislator Nancy Barr, who represents the 6th Legislative District, which includes most of the airport grounds, Village of Rybrook, Village of Portchester, and most of the town village of Harrison. Also joined by members of my executive team, Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins, Director of Operations Joan McDonald, County Attorney John Nona, Catherine Chaffee, who's our Director of Communications. The head of the Airport Advisory Board, Peter Schlachtis, is with us here, who is a Rybrook resident. And we also have with us here George Klein, who is a noted environmentalist and a regional head of the Sierra Club. And we have a number of other people here as well. We're going to open it up for some comments from each of them as we go through our activity today. The announcements that we're going to make today involve two separate processes to accomplish the same goal. And I think it's important to note in a broad context, this is an example of what participatory democracy looks like. Because while those of us who are in elective office are going to take specific action to codify policy, much of that policy came out of the advocacy of individuals in the environmental community and individuals who, on their own time, are advocates for the correct kind of environmental protections here at this county airport. And the fact that those of us in government are working alongside those who are advocating, there's always those moments where you have your disagreements or your process to an end result isn't always the smoothest path. But at the end of the day, the concerns that they raised are listened to and are now being codified in very specific action. And that is a statement that advocacy matters, not just in this public area public policy, but in all areas of public policy in Westchester County. And Nancy will speak on behalf of the Board of Legislators, but they are the People's Chamber that has this type of free, open dialogue on a regular basis, and we're trying to add that to within the executive function. There are a couple of different things that we'll highlight in general, and then there'll be some specifics to follow. We took office, this administration took office in 2018. It also happens to be the time that Nancy assumed her position as a county legislator. We voluntarily reinstituted groundwater testing here at the county airport for pollutants which had been eliminated a number of years prior. That testing program, I think, was discontinued in 2011 and was done without the approval of the Board of Legislators and without any kind of a public dialogue or improvement about it. John Nona, our county attorney, recently had a press conference where he outlined the county's water-related environmental efforts regarding the airport, and most of these come from the reinstitution of the water testing program, which showed that there are issues and there are problems. And those problems can be addressed, and we intend to address them. These announcements represent the fact that groundwater and surface water testing at the county airport at least on a biannual basis, perhaps more frequently, to test for the presence of pollutants, which include but are not limited to PFASs. Now, it's a long scientific word. If I read the word to you, I would just be a parrot repeating what word is in front of me. But they represent chemical pollutants that were part of a number of different operations here, one of which was firefighting foam used 3 decades plus ago when we had that type of practice here by the Air National Guard. And then also that as soon as possible and under whatever the federal laws are, that an additional set of chemicals, and the acronym is AFFF. I'm going to turn to John for any explanation of these things, that those things will be used by private operators here to protect those actions that are not under government control but are under private operator control as well, to be controlled, monitored, and treated properly. The governmental process here is that in my capacity as county executive, with the advice of our senior management team, I will sign into order executive orders that take these two items, which were both proposed by a group of advocates led by George Klein, Peter Schlachtis, and others, and we will put them into effect as formal public policy. They are public policy already, but informally, and we're going to formalize them with an executive order. However, an executive order could be rescinded at any point in time in the future by a future county executive. So when Nancy steps to the microphone, she will talk about a legislative embodiment of these principles so that they will survive the whim of any county executive and will become part of law. And the likelihood of those things being overturned by a future legislature and a future county executive are highly unlikely. They represent permanent protections for the people of Westchester County to make sure that these particular chemicals will always be testing for these chemicals, and there'll always be an effort to make sure that these chemicals are not used on this property by government or county government or by private entities that are here on this situation. So I'm going to first sign the 2 executive orders, and then I'm going to invite Nancy Barr to speak, and then after that we'll have some other folks to speak. The first one is Executive Order number 3. You will have copies of these if you'd like to see them in detail. This is the one that ensures that there will be ongoing groundwater and surface water testing at the Westchester County Airport on a regular biannual basis. That's a minimum. We certainly reserve the right to test more frequently if we have reason to at any point in time. So by my signature, dated today is the 22nd of May. Yes. My half birthday. Halfway between 65 and 66. That order is now in force and in effect, and the second executive order does the non-fluorinated AFFF substances should be used in lieu of those that contain PFAS. I know you're going to have questions about that. John, be ready to answer those questions, since I didn't do very well in chemistry. But by executive order, both of those are now effective policy in Westchester County within that which a county executive can control. I'm going to ask Legislator Nancy Barr now to describe the legislation that she has proposed, the process by which that legislation will hopefully become law and will supersede these executive orders, making it the law of Westchester County, not merely the policy of Westchester County. Legislator Barr.
Thank you so much, and thank you to County Executive Latimer for signing these executive orders, and to our friends at the Coalition for the Prevention of Airport Expansion and all of the environmental groups that are both a part of that and also active in other ways. That's really, as was stated, this is sort of the culmination of some conversations that we've been having over the last several months. And what I am proposing to do is to take these executive orders and, as County Executive Latimer said, codify them, make them law, so that they cannot easily be removed, and they certainly would have to be it would have to be discussed with any future Board of Legislators, because once it's a law, you can't simply just ignore it. So again, under the law, similar to the executive orders, we would have groundwater testing at least twice a year at the airport for these PFAS. And as of right now, 2 of the chemicals that are part of this PFAS family have already been excluded from being used at the airport, but the FAA is still requiring that some of the PFAS are used because for firefighting. However, due to a law that was passed at the federal level, that practice will end in the next couple of years. So what we have said is, as soon as the federal government says it's okay, we are going to stop using anything that has the PFAS in them, and that would apply to anyone who is here at the airport, tenants and so forth. So I'm really proud to be able to be introducing this. It will be introduced at our next Board of Legislators meeting, and then, as you probably know, it goes into committees, including my committee, which is the Environment, Health, and Energy Committee. We discuss it, we make any adjustments to it, and then we have a public hearing on it, and finally the entire board gets to vote on it. So I think, I'm hoping to see this move rather quickly. I don't think it's controversial. I think that we feel on the legislature that this is our job to protect health and safety of our residents, and that's precisely what this law does. And it shouldn't be up to the whim of whoever happens to be in the county executive seat at the time. So I'm looking forward to continuing to work with the executive team, as well as the coalition and the other environmental groups, to get this passed into law. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to ask George Klein, who is, I don't know if he's president, but whatever his title is with Sierra Club. George, you can describe your title for the press. to share any of your comments, then I'll call on Peter Schlachtis.
Thank you. I'm George Klein. I'm the chairman of the Coalition to Prevent Westchester Airport Expansion, which is composed of many local environmental groups. And we applaud the signing of the 2 executive orders today by County Executive Latimer to protect the public water drinking supply and public health in general. And we look forward to working with Mr. Latimer's administration and with the Board of Legislators on further protection for Westchester residents. And our main goal is to prevent expansion of the airport. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And now Peter Schlachtis, who is chairman of the Airport Advisory Board.
Thank you, George. On behalf of the Airport Advisory Board, I want to thank County Executive Latimer, his senior executive team, County Legislator Nancy Barr and her colleagues for all the work that they have done and are doing and will do to protect the environment and the communities impacted by the airport. As has been mentioned, these PFAS chemicals are of concern because the airport, in particular because the airport lies so close to the Kensico Reservoir, which is the source of most of our drinking water for the residents in this county and surrounding region. And it's welcoming that, or it's heartening that no pollution has been found in the reservoir. We know that everyone wants to keep it that way. And on behalf of the Airport Advisory Board, I want to thank the county for over the year that I've been privileged to serve, for increasingly engaging with us and shifting the dialogue to be receptive to community and environmental concerns as they have today. So thank you again.
And just introduce the other colleagues of yours that are here.
Oh, okay, yes, sorry. We have other members of the Coalition to Prevent Westchester Airport Expansion and active volunteers who have contributed to our monthly airport advisory meetings, which, by the way, are held on the 4th Wednesday of each month, generally in this building, and the public is fully welcome to attend. So we have Robert Fleischer, who is a colleague of mine from Newcastle on the Airport Advisory Board. We have Dookie Baxter. We have Ann Jaffe Holmes from the Federation of Westchester Conservationists, and Linda Brunner. Sorry?
Yonkers resident and Lower Hudson Sierra.
Lower Hudson Sierra. We have a number. I mean, this is a coalition that has brought a number of disparate organizations and communities together. So Ellen Weidinger, yep, exactly. And from grassroots, right, grassroots environmental education. So we have, again, a broad group that all thanks the efforts of all of you here today. Okay.
Now, I'm going to ask John Nona, who is our county attorney and chief chemist on these issues, to talk a little bit about what the actual chemical realities are. I've used acronyms. John has delved into this very deeply. He did it to understand what the law can and should protect and provide against. He's also been involved in discussions with the state that we believe will lead to a consent order where the state will ensure that these actions are carried out by the county in a mutual fashion. But we're not yet at the point of announcing the consent order that I think is coming soon. But John, if you can just discuss a little bit about the PFAS and the related chemical structure, we'd appreciate it.
I do have to confess I barely passed chemistry in high school.
Well, that's not good.
But as a lawyer, your job is to learn this stuff. PFAS are a class of part of a class of chemicals known as perfluoralkyl or polyfluoralkyl chemicals, and they're used in many different ways. They're used to make Teflon, which resulted in the pollution of the water supply of Hoosick Falls, New York. They're used to make pizza boxes. They're used in certain cosmetics. They're used in many different products, but they can contaminate drinking water. How are they used at the airport? Well, traditionally, the airports need strong fire suppression materials, and that's aqueous firefighting foam, AFFF. And firefighting foam that was used by the Air National Guard for fire training purposes contained two forms of these chemicals, PFOA and PFOS. I'm not even going to try to pronounce what those refer to. But they were used by the Air National Guard right here for firefighting training, and that resulted in contamination of the groundwater at the airport as a result. This is groundwater that's not drunk. We test this through wells that are not drinking wells, but test wells, monitoring wells. And high concentrations of PFOA and PFOS have been found in the groundwater here at the airport, and they've been found in airports throughout the country where the Air National Guard conducted firefighting training using these chemicals, PFOA and PFOS. So this is an emerging contaminant. The state health department is supposed to come out with a standard, a minimum contaminant level standard. We're waiting to find out what that standard will be, and we will have to deal with that standard in remediating the groundwater contamination at this airport. Now, beyond those two chemicals, PFOA and PFOS, there's a whole other class of PFAS chemicals, PFASs, that are used in different firefighting foams. And while the firefighting foam at this airport and other airports may not use PFOA and PFOS, they have firefighting foam using other PFASs. And those firefighting foams with PFASs were mandated by the FAA. We had to use those in case of a fire at the airport. We don't use them for training. Our firefighting training here at the airport uses water to put out fires that are set for training purposes. But if there's a fire, the firefighting foam would contain some of these other PFAS chemicals that are not considered at the present time as dangerous as PFOA and PFOS, but they are potential contaminants and they're still being researched. Now, the FAA, in a Reauthorization Act last year, provided that in 3 years this mandate will no longer exist. So we will not be required to use any aqueous firefighting foam, AFFF, with these other PFAS chemicals. So that's why the executive order and the legislation that Legislator Barr is proposing will provide that as soon as that time period comes up, as soon as we no longer have to use firefighting foam with PFAS in them, we will mandate that they will not be used at the airport by the county for its firefighting or for any of the tenants in their hangars. So that's my report. Thank you.
Well done.
All of that's going to be on the final. I hope you were taking notes. I just want to highlight specifically again so we understand this. The point was made earlier. None of these chemicals have been found in the drinking water at the reservoir. The action that we're taking is to prevent that from happening going forward. And if we were to do nothing, the stopping of the water testing, we wouldn't know how close we were coming to the water line, and in theory that could happen within a certain amount of time as chemicals move underground with water. But there have been no examples of it yet showing up in the testing of the drinking watershed. That's what we're trying to prevent, and that's what we're going to try to correct by all of the remediation action that we'll be agreeing to do under the supervision of the State Department of Environmental Conservation. As I said, there'll be some announcement about that perhaps within the week, and when we do, we'll go with that. The pens by which I signed the executive orders, I'd like to give one to George Klein, if I may.
Thank you.
And one to Peter Schlachtis on behalf of your advocacy and your organization's advocacy that brought these issues to the fore and really helped create the climate by which these executive orders could come to pass. And before we go to general questions, do not think that we are done with our work at the airport. We're just beginning on a host of different things that have to be done. Joan McDonnell is taking responsibility for a request for proposals, which will be going out fairly shortly. It's been a while to make sure we get it just right so that we can do a full new master plan at this airport. Whatever has been done up to this point is inadequate or dated at best. We've not had a full, proper master plan of this airport since 1989. We assume it'll take us 1.5 years to do it right. It will go before the Board of Legislators for their scrutiny. It will have a SECRA, a State Environmental Quality Review document attached to it, so it's done appropriately. There will be ample opportunity for proper input by the public on the document before it's finalized, and then it'll go to the FAA and every other resource. Again, it's not a short process, and it shouldn't be a short process, but we're doing this now without the benefit of any FAA grant to do it. We're doing it because we know that we need to have a new master plan in place, and we think that's going to be an essential discussion by everybody here, because it's going to govern how do we deal with the FBOs, how do we deal with this terminal, how do we deal with all the other functions and services around this operation. We have communicated with the FAA. We've asked them to have an FAA representative come to Westchester for a public meeting. We've already committed to do it in Chappaqua, to listen to residents who have concerns about the noise from flights overhead, and so that the FAA representative can hear exactly what it is that we're hearing as local managers of the airport. We have the ability through protections to do certain things. We're discussing those issues now, the gates and the passenger per half hour protections. We as a county government do not have control over the flight paths in the skies. We need the FAA to see what that problem is, understand it, and then help us come up with solutions that will deal with the actual issue on the ground. That request has been made. We hope to have it satisfied as soon as we can. As I said, we've committed, Rob and the people of Newcastle, to hold that meeting in Chappaqua. You may recall last year we had speak-outs in Armonk, in West Harrison, and in Rye Brook. So we want to make sure we're getting around to all of the different jurisdictions and people have a chance to come and to have their voices heard. We have new monitors in place to collect noise data. I don't know if we have enough time frame yet to show patterns of that. At some point in time, we were planning to have the media come to see what the monitors look like. I assume we'll do that yet to come. And when we do, that will give you yet another piece of the puzzle in terms of what we're doing with the airport. We have an airport advisory board that is active and involved. We got to get them a bigger meeting space because the meetings are now filled to the rafters. We are, I believe, we're taping them now so that people can watch the videos. We established that. Hopefully, we're still doing that. And that will give people who can't come to the meeting the opportunity to see the discussion and the dialogue at the AAB. And let me point out that we're joined here by Airport Manager Peter Shearer on behalf of Avports. Avports is our partner. They are a private sector entity that manages the airport at the direction of the county. We consider this a public-private partnership. And so discussions that you've had in the past about we need to privatize the airport, it is privatized. We have a private company that does the management of the airport at the direction of the county, and we believe that that is a good working type of public-private partnership. And as we go forward with that, we'll have further discussions. There'll be discussion on the terminal use agreement, which I believe is due at the end of the year. It expires, and we'll have to have a discussion about what happens in that. The legislature will be involved in that as a party to that. Let me point out that we're also joined by Legislator David Tubiolo from the board. Dave, why don't you come over and stand over here? You got to show the world that you were here, so get the photo visuality there. So with that, I'm going to stop, open it up to questions. Because a lot of this deals with chemicals and technology, I freely admit that is not my area of expertise, so John is on notice that he's going to come up to handle those. Any question relative to the airport is fair game. If you want to interview any of these individuals individually when we're finished, we're happy to have you do that. If you have any questions on any other topics, we'll entertain them after we complete this, and you have any other one-on-one interviews, because there are obviously other topics at hand in county government. But let me open it up to questions that relate to what we're announcing today at the airport, and then any other airport-related questions. Rebecca.
When was the last time that the Air National Guard used the PFAS for testing, and if they are to test again, is there another non-toxic substance that they could use?
My understanding was mid-1980s when they were last used here for firefighting.
The Air National Guard left here in 1983, so there's been no firefighting testing, as far as we know, with PFAS chemicals since then.
Okay.
The concern at this airport.
At this airport. Right.
And the concern we have is that aside from what the airport operators operate for the airport itself, that the fixed-based operators also have the ability to fight fires should they break out in their hangars or on their property. And the chemicals that they use are not under our direct control, but they fall into the same categories of concerning chemicals. That's why we did this the way we did do it, to try to make sure that the non-county controlled elements of the airport also meet this standard of chemical treatment. Yes,
how far is the reservoir from here? And if you can describe the concerns about contamination.
Well, the concerns, Peter, I think are pretty clear for us in that the relative proximity, and I don't know, Peter, if you know the exact distance between the end of the county, I don't know, maybe the runway is what we're thinking of, but the end of the county property to the water?
Probably half a mile.
About a half a mile. And of course, drainage, makes it right next door for all practical purposes. But I think the concern is if we were to operate the airport without an eye to any kind of drainage or potential leakage of any chemicals on this site, and that goes from de-icing to you name it. If we had no provisions to protect against those things, it would make its way into the drinking water and contaminate it. We have had protections in place for a while, but we're also dealing with chemicals that have a long shelf life. If they can discontinue things in 1983, the year I turned 30, and I'm halfway between 65 and 66 now, and the chemicals are still in the ground, we're dealing with long-term potential for pollution. Years from now, when I'm not in this position, chemicals that have occurred on this property will still be potentially threats to drinking water. So this is not a 1 year or 2 year fix. This is a multiple year commitment that we have to make to correct what's wrong. Other questions? Yes?
What was the reason for hiring Harris, Miller, and Hansen to conduct the first phase of the noise study at the airport?
Joan, do you want to handle that? The noise study?
Why don't we do the noise stuff separately?
We'll do that separate?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll talk about that then singularly. Anything else on the water pollution issues, what we were here to announce today? Rebecca?
Yeah, George, if you could just talk a little bit about, from an environmental standpoint, the importance of having these executive orders for your community, for people who really do care about the environment at a time when you're seeing a push for this, to have a greener community.
Well, it's very basic. Because of the threat of these PFAS to the drinking water supply, we have to both find out how intensively distributed these PFAS are, and that's being done by the first executive order to mandate that the test wells continue to operate into the future, no matter what the as Mr. Latimer said, no matter what the whims of the county executive are at that time, and the legislature will make it law. And then the second order, I'm just forgetting what the second.
I just want to know, from an environmental standpoint, why is it so important to have these executive orders as an environmentalist and someone who cares about this area?
It's very basic. It's to protect the drinking water supply from the threat of these very dangerous chemicals. That's why. Yeah. Public health.
Let me add to that, Rebecca. If you assume that we maintain a water testing program, those are public documents and they are foilable. So when you have the potential to show that these water testing sequences show an increase of pollutant, you as a private citizen would have the ability to access that information, and if the executive branch were not acting to solve those problems, you would at least know it. Without a water testing program at all, anything could be happening, and you wouldn't know what the potential liability was. So to reinstitute the testing program gives the public, as well as the government, an understanding of what's happening out there. And it could be, if we had gone, I'm theorizing now, but if we didn't reinstitute water testing over a couple of years' time, maybe less, these chemicals might show up in the drinking water, and by then your remediation problem is much greater, because you're going to have to deal with a polluted drinking watershed that's much harder to clean than when it's in the groundwater, not yet reaching the water. So that's the logic of locking in the groundwater testing and doing it in a public session like this, so that individuals know that this is public information, not just proprietary information that an executive branch could hold on to. As you're watching the stories of Washington, D.C. right now, you're watching an executive branch that not only will withhold information from the public, but from the legislative body. And this opens it up. This says it's not just a handful of us who are going to make these decisions. It's going to be open to the scrutiny of the public and the press.
And in fact, the previous administration in 2011 did suspend water testing of wells at the airport, and there was no public notice of that.
George, can I add a quick?
Yeah, sure, please, Peter. And then we'll go to Peter's next question.
Thank you. Just in regard to your question as well. Today it's PFAS. Yesterday it was petrocarbons.
Could you move? Thank you.
Sorry. Today it's PFAS. 20 years ago, the same site was contaminated with, I believe it was petrocarbons. And it was cleaned up by the county. But PFAS wasn't on the radar screen. So PFAS is still here today, threatening our water supply. We don't know what it's going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, but we need to have this testing continue, and we need it to be renewed to include whatever are seen as emerging contaminants in years to come, so that we have greater advance warning than we did this time around, because in part of the cessation of testing over many of the over past years. So, you know, it's a safeguard for the future as well. Thank you.
So, Peter raised an interesting point. So the area where the Air National Guard conducted these tests, which we call colloquially the burn pit. So they used to pour jet fuel. That was the original contaminant that was looked for back 20 years ago, and it was cleaned up because they'd pour the jet fuel, set it on fire, and then put it out with the firefighting foam with the PFOAs in it. But back then, no one understood or knew that the PFOA and PFOS chemicals were contaminants and could affect public health if it got into drinking water. So no one tested for those back then. That wasn't done until 2017, after this problem arose in Hoosick Falls, New York, North Petersburg, and Stewart Air Base in Newark. But the original tests were for the jet fuel and those kinds of compounds, and that was cleaned up back then. So as Peter pointed out, there could be new contaminants emerging in the future, so that's why you have to keep this testing going, the groundwater monitoring going.
Okay, I want to make sure I open it up so you can interview some of these people one-on-one, which may be the more interesting element of this. I just want to close with one very general, sort of thematic comment. If you stand where we're standing here and you look down there, you see a room full of people who are waiting to take a flight out of here. Unless there is somebody down there that I happen to know personally, these are people whom I don't know. I look down at them, and I realize that I personally have an obligation to those people. When I go to community events, and I go to a lot of them, if you follow me on Twitter and Facebook, all over this county, I go into rooms of people that I don't know. They might know my name, maybe they don't know my name, they may know what my title is, but my responsibility remains whether they know it or I know them. And that responsibility is what I ran for 2 years ago. And I said, I will take on that obligation, and I want to move this county in a different direction. It's not as easy to do it as perhaps I thought it was. And there's always a question of money involved. That's why we'll have other press conferences to talk about how we hope to have more money to run the government properly. But whether we're talking about playland, whether we're talking about opening pools down in Yonkers, whether we're talking about protecting an historical site in North Castle, whether we're struggling to get Memorial Field back on beam, whether we're trying to figure out homeless people and where they live in Peekskill, and every one of those things, I've taken on an obligation. I've made a commitment by running and taking the oath of office to deal with these issues as best as we can. The news here is that we're listening. We're listening to the community. When the community has good ideas, when the legislature has good ideas, we're saying, that makes sense, let's implement that. That's what today is about. Because at the end of the day, you'll know that I took my name off of all these buildings which would have come with me as a county executive. It doesn't matter who the county executive is per se. It doesn't matter if your name's on the building. It matters if you're serving those people, all of those people. That's what this is about today. So thanks very much.